Hey guys, okay, so I'm here with Gary, my good friend, which has recently bought a property, and we're going to talk about that journey, right? From the beginning. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do, and what made you decide to buy property?
Yeah, so I work in a fintech financial technology company here in Sydney, and I've kind of gone through different journeys in terms of investment products and savings, and always been close to and understood finance and saving, and yeah, tried investments and tried bonds and just general cash ISAs, that type of thing. But always thought there's something more I can do. I can get my cash to work for me a little bit better, and it's been a bit of a time period and a journey to get to the point where I felt comfortable to say, okay, it's time to jump on the wagon in terms of getting an investment property. But I probably spent the last 12 months, maybe even more, in and around looking at properties, looking about where to buy, trying to wrap my head around all the information that's out there. And there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people telling you different information. And I think it can be sort of paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
And there can be a lot of stuff out there. You don't know what's true, what to trust, and you just kind of end up doing nothing. So I think it's been a bit of a journey, and I kind of felt that a little bit myself, even though I've always been comfortable with finance, working in finance and technology, and I have a background in mortgages, so I understand the product side very well. But actually, even with that, even with someone who's fairly close and understands it, you can still be paralyzed a little bit by all the information out there and getting comfortable taking that first step. So yeah, been a bit of been a bit of a journey. But then, yeah, he spoke to your good self, and we took some quick, active steps to make it happen.
Yeah, and although it wasn't as smooth as you would think, right? There's a lot of steps involved in it, right?
A lot more than I thought. Yeah, it's not an easy process,
Yeah.
and I think even with, I think one thing for me, going from doing all of the research, understanding everything, is that you got to really trust and believe in the people that you are working with, whether it's a buyer's agent, a broker, a conveyancer. You definitely need experts around you, and don't think that you can do it all, because you need to put your trust and belief in the experts, because they're experts, right?
Yeah.
And they know a lot more than you do, even if you
Yeah.
do a lot of desktop research.
Yeah.
But it's getting those experts, that people you trust, are valued, whether it's speaking to friends or just really finding people that you believe in and trust, and making them sort of work for you effectively.
Yeah.
I think that's been really important. But yeah, it's not an easy process. Even with that, there's still a lot of things to understand and unpick. And I think the important thing for me is trying to educate myself on the way.
That's it.
And not just letting things happen to me, because when you're educating yourself and you're learning from experts like yourself in the respective areas, then that's going to make property 2, 3, 4, 5 easier.
That's it.
Because you understand more, you've consumed more information, you can take that forward with you. And as you become a potentially more sophisticated investor, that's only going to help, right? So
Yes.
I would say not letting it just happen to you, but being as actively engaged as you can or want to be is going to be helpful in taking that information on.
That's it. Create don't let it to chance. Some people buy and they hope,
Yeah.
right? Buy and hope. You can not leave it to hope. You can create the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, absolutely.
with having the right people and making the right decision. It's really hard to make decisions nowadays because there's a lot of different conflicting ideas around the internet if you're searching. And yeah, most people, I find they struggle with that. And it's like, as you mentioned, and as you've now discovered, it's not like you go to the shop and buy a property, right? It's there's so many elements involved and there's so many decisions to make, and it's quite hard for someone for the first time.
Yeah.
You can do it. It's very hard to have a good outcome if you do it by yourself, especially if someone who's full-time employed.
Completely.
When you're employed full-time, really you have probably a couple of hours of spare time a day, maybe a few hours on the weekend. You know, with that kind of time, you're not going to be able to really learn any skill really well.
Yeah, and I think you could try and do it on your own. Yeah. I think it's definitely riskier, and you're kind of leaving it to chance a little bit. Yes, you might get there, and you might pick a good property in the right suburb, and it might do well. That could happen, right? But you're leaving it more to chance and less. There's likely less chance and likelihood of success, I think, rather than having, again, like I said before, the experts work for you. And also I think the other thing is having that peace of mind, knowing that you've done everything you can to put yourself in the right position and a position of success, so that in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, those goals that you've set yourself, that you've put yourself in the best position to achieve those goals, rather than trying to do everything yourself up front and not achieving your goals down the line because you didn't set yourself up for success. You've set yourself up for mediocrity or potentially failure, when actually, if you use those experts and taken that advice and done it in the right way up front, then the chances, I think, of you achieving those goals are much greater down the line.
Exactly. I mean, you generally, anything you want to do, you want to get advice from people who have done it. So people who have achieved what you're trying to achieve. That's a good way to go about anything. So if you want to have a great body, you probably should get advice from someone who's really fit, right? Not someone who's unfit. And so it's the same thing. And so for me now, in my business, I'm looking at mentors, people who have succeeded in this type of business, and to get their mentorship, and they could be immensely helpful. Yeah. And so in terms of property investing, having that mentor would be, it's really, it just gives you a lot of confidence. So if we look back over the past few months, every week, sometimes every day, you would ask a couple of questions. And I would answer it.
Lots of questions for you.
Lots of questions. Yeah. Kept us busy, that's for sure. And so imagine if all those questions, and a lot of them are very intricate, right? It's not like a Google type of question.
Not at all, yeah. Yeah, there's only so much ChatGPT you have.
Yeah, it's imagine not having that, right? So you have to try to figure these things out. It'll be very hard.
Yeah, because it can be nuanced to the individual situation or property. Like, when it's been going through the financing journey and consideration of, okay, what would you do in this scenario based on individual income types or profiles, or what would you do in this situation, or types of insurances on the property we spoke about. All these things, it's just, as a first-time property buyer, I don't have a owner-occupier property myself, so it's the first foray into buying any sort of property, right? Yes. And if you're doing that, an investment property is your first property purchase, then it's even more so the case, right? Because you've not even been through this journey before.
Yes.
So there's a lot of things that you just will not know because it's the first time. And the first time doing everything, you're going to be learning. So, I had countless questions for you that were coming up, multiple times a day, that, I didn't know. And didn't know where to, and would look, would have a look online. But again, because it can be so nuanced to the individual property or the situation or the goals that I had in mind, we talked about everything that we're trying to achieve. It can be really difficult. And also going back to my earlier point around having people around you that you trust. It's really important. Again, that peace of mind thing is really, really important, to have that person you can go to and ask for that advice or that steer, or, a lot of times with us, it was, am I overthinking this? Is this simpler than I'm making it? And a lot of the times probably.
Yes.
But that's, that's my nature. But yeah.
And that's very common. There's a lot of nerves generally when you are often, this is the biggest investment for people, right?
Huge.
And naturally, there's a lot of nerves, and it's completely normal. We have a lot of, terms for this. There's buyer's remorse, and there's every time people, especially when people don't have an expert, what often happens, and I see this a lot, after they buy, they feel so unsure. They've already purchased.
Yeah.
They're like, did I make a mistake? And this lingers on for quite some time. And then some of them, the answer is yes, you've made a mistake. They realize it a year later.
And it's a costly mistake to make when you're talking about property.
Exactly.
It's, again, to use your example, you're not popped down to the shop to buy a loaf of bread. You've made a huge financial commitment. So.
Exactly. And you can't, it's like, you can't, it's not, there's no stop loss or,
That's
like
right.
in shares.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about your finance background. So have you invested in, like, we just want to compare property and shares and stuff. So you had the option to maybe keep your money as someone who's in the fintech industry, elsewhere and not put it in property. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I've sort of dabbled in a number of things previously. Bonds, funds, ETFs, index trackers, all of that type of thing. And you would get somewhere between, although recent years has been sort of way more volatile, generally you're talking somewhere between a 5% and a 15% return. Generally, that's kind of where the market's been over the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's, if I look over the past 10 years, that's where my money's been, that's where I've invested. But it was that A, volatility in the market, and B, all you're investing is the money you have. So the gains are limited to what you've invested, right? And it felt like there was something more out there. There was the gains were, they were nice, 5-10%, that's okay, that's pretty good, but it's marginally beating inflation. Yes. Which we know is a challenge.
Yeah.
So in real terms, you're not massively up. And I just always had this feeling that there's more I can do with my money. There's an asset I can invest in. There's a strategy that I can take to not fully replace, but also complement potential other investment streams. I think having a diverse portfolio is really important, but to complement what I have and maybe do a bit of repositioning. And that's where I always, thought, being involved in property, working in mortgages is my background, and understanding a little bit about that world. That's kind of where I started to look to maybe about 18 months ago and say, right, this feels right in terms of an asset class to then go into. And as you know, more than anyone, things like the power of leverage, right? And not you have the power of the funds that the bank lends you to invest. So unlike shares where you just have your money to invest, with the power of leverage, you have 9-10 times that. You have a lot more. And actually, if you look at some of the examples that you've shown me and we've seen in some of the good suburbs, that 5, 10, 15% of annual growth that you look at in your shares, which can be volatile, you invest in our area and you can exceed that.
That's it. So generally, in the long term, in real estate, we also get 5 to 15%. It's in the long term, and I think with shares, if you look at U.S. like New York Stock Exchange or the ASX 200 here, they would hover around this sort of 8-9% average long term, and property is about the same. It's maybe 1% to 2% lower, long-term average. But property has leverage. So you invest 5 times at least of your initial deposit, what you have. So that's the big differentiator. And often the properties that we buy, the holding cost is non-existent because we buy neutral cash flow properties. So it costs you nothing to hold it. So really the math is just the growth that you get. Because, and that's a mistake that some people make. There is different strategies and it might suit some people, but having and that's a podcast of its own. But buying negatively geared properties, that's it's a different strategy altogether. But what we've done here in your strategy was to create passive income.
That's right.
And the passive income is created through rent. So what happens here, some people buy a property that's $3 million and it's the rent they get is $1,000 a week. And the rental yield is like 2%, whereas their repayments are like 6%. So it's actually costing them money to hold that asset. It does grow in value in terms of capital growth, but that's not really what we do. That you can't really create passive income with that. So let's talk about now since you decided to invest in property, a lot of people naturally, and this is because I talk to people on a daily basis, their automatic idea is that I want to invest in property, so I'm going to buy a house and I'm going to go live in it, right? I think feels like everybody does that. I feel like there's less than 10% of people that don't do that. But I strongly believe that that's not necessarily the best avenue, because this is my logic, right? So let's say you want to invest in shares. Let's say you really like Apple products, like you have an iPhone. But does that mean because you like it, you're going to invest in Apple? Or maybe Samsung, when you have you're investing, everyone has their own investing strategies, right? Maybe Samsung shares are actually more undervalued, have more growth. And that's what happens. So people, for example, they like to live in a certain area. But if you're thinking in that way, you're not looking at what areas actually are going to outgrow. So the thinking should not be based on where you prefer to live. But as an investment, you should think about where it's going to grow.
That's right. It's almost taking the emotion out of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's focusing on data and letting the data steer you rather than emotion. And I think society and our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, has created this ideology where it's you grow up, you go to school, you go to university, I guess our generation, and then you buy a house and you get married and have kids. That's the natural progression. And maybe at some point, 5-10 years after you buy your first house, then you might buy an investment property because that's a natural progression. And I think that's just the way we've been conditioned.
Yes.
And it's that sort of legacy that's been left over from the previous generations and that way of doing things. So I think the vast majority of people that you speak to, I speak to too. My friends have the same approach because it's been conditioned. That will take time to change because it's so deeply ingrained in how people think that it's just that natural step and progression,
Yeah.
But thinking outside of the box and changing that mindset, I think the mindset of owning homes first that you don't live in is a strange one for people to think about.
Yes.
Because it's not natural.
Yes.
People, again, have been ingrained to think, buy home, live in home, pay off the mortgage.
Yes.
And then everything else is kind of investments. Everything else that they have left over after their salary is investments, and we can figure that out.
Yes.
But actually, this is turning it on its head and saying,
Yes.
well, maybe that doesn't make the most sense, actually. And let's look a little bit more outside the box and let's be holistic and say, okay, well, you can buy a house for investment purposes first, but you can rent at the same time.
Yes.
You know, rentvesting, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the sort of mindset and approach that probably over the last 18 months that I've kind of come to realize, and in our discussions about why that makes so much sense.
Yes.
And going on that journey and setting out a strategy to say, okay, this is why it makes sense, and this is the journey you go on, and this is how we can do it.
Exactly. And often where people are at, most people, their budget is, around, let's say $1 million, right? We have people from generally around, young professionals, sort of $700,000 to $1 million a budget, right? Depending on their income. Your option is if you live in Sydney, your option is a small apartment to go and live in, and you have to think long term, right? Mm-hmm. You might, as a first step, you might tick a couple of boxes. You say, I bought a house, right? And I'm comfortable now. But you really got to think, like, if you're going to have kids later, is that place sufficient to? So you have to then relocate again.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? And then you have to think, okay, so what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years from now? And often you'll find that property, that as a first home buyer, your budget was quite limited, you will have to sell it and buy somewhere else anyways. Mm-hmm. So if your goal is, you got to look at what your goal is. Sometimes it's benefits you a lot more to rentvest, and then eventually work your way up to a house that you're gonna keep for forever.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, my strategy personally was, how can I create a passive income that gives me flexibility in the next 5 to 10 years? I want choice. I want flexibility to say, this is how I want to spend my working life, or not working life. I want choice. I want that freedom of choice. And that's what I've chose as my sort of strategy and what we're working towards. And what does that look like, every year, every property purchase, in terms of the asset and location, the cash flow, and all of those variables. But to your point, I think also, I speak to a number of friends, and if we focus on Sydney, most of the friends I speak to, they have a budget of somewhere between, 1.2 and 1.8 million in terms of getting their first home. And these are people who've worked professionally for a number of years. And you look around Sydney, Surrey Hills, CBD, it's probably a 2-bedroom flat at best with no outside space. And they're beautiful places. But again, if you're thinking longer term, having a family, you, to your point, will likely have to then upgrade again, right? Yes. So you'd hope that property would increase in value. So again, buying in the right place. But the rentvesting idea is that, you can still rent where you want to live, in a property you want to live, but invest in an asset that's really going to grow and work hard for you. And the view is that in time that you can take equity out of that property and then buy your sort of dream home, right? Your future forever home, so that actually it's kind of future-proofed in a way. So I think that's something that I see, not personally, but when I'm speaking to other people, that's kind of at the back of my mind as well. I'm thinking, if I was in that situation, maybe I could also do what I'm doing, but have a different goal.
Yeah. And what really helps here, most people don't realize, and it's because they don't talk to someone like me or a financial planner or something like that, is they don't realize that renting in Sydney is quite affordable compared to buying. So property prices have gone up so much, but rent comparatively to the areas that we're buying is not that high. So their cash flow is much worse off. So in Sydney, you'll have better cash flow if you just rent, actually. Because mortgage repayments for those homes are much more than the rent of it. Yeah. So, for example, those friends of you buying a property, 1.5 million, if their mortgage repayment is, as an example, $3,000 a week, that same house, they could probably rent it for $1,500 a week,
That's right.
right? So they're sacrificing a lot to hold that asset. Whereas what they could have deployed their capital in cities that cash flow really well, and then use that cash flow to rent in Sydney, where it's renting is the smarter option in this case.
But still live in the same quality and
Same
type
quality
of house they want to live in.
Yeah.
But and I think, again, back to what we were speaking about, I think it's that societal thing. It's I want to own a home that I live in. I can say it's mine, and I think it's just challenging that mindset and asking why. Asking yourself, why do I want to do that? Why does that make sense is really powerful. Yeah. Rather than just, well, it's what's always been done, and that kind of makes sense. But I think asking yourself why is really important.
Do you find it weird that you didn't actually see the properties you bought? Do you think that's something that holds some people back?
Question. Yeah,
because
it's an interesting question.
A lot of people want to feel things.
I'm quite comfortable with it. Yeah, I don't think so. I think I'm kind of it was it's not an emotional purchase. Yeah. It's not a home or a property. It's not a home, it's a property. Yeah. Right? That's my sort of detachment. It's not a home, it's a property. Yeah. So in that aspect, it's not emotional. It's driven on a strategy. It's just, for me, it's just another investment. It's another asset, whether I'm buying a bond or a property. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
So that's the way I kind of categorize it. It's taking the emotion out of it, and it's an asset to deploy as part of an investment strategy. So me personally, no, but I could see why some people might want to. But me personally, no.
Yeah. And so it's now all done and it's rented. How was that? Have you got the first rent in your account yet? How does that feel?
Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, first tenants are in. Yeah. They were in within a week of settlement. 8-9 days maybe. So, rents in, tenants are in there, which is good. And since then, it's been very quiet, which is great. Yeah. And that's what you want. I think there's a lot of work and information and things to do and complete, whether it's the broker or the conveyancing up into and through the buying process. Yes. But then when you have the tenants in there and the rent's coming in, then it's just quiet. but yeah, it's good. It's good. That's the high, kind of holy grail to get to that point, and then you hope that everything sort of just hums away and works for itself.
Yeah, and that's the goal with the properties we buy. They're low maintenance, buy and forget type things.
That's right.
We make sure there will be no issues, because if you make a mistake, there could be a lot of issues. As an example, you could buy in an area where you might not quite get tenants that you might get tenants that cause issues for you. That's one example. Or you might buy a property that's will have maintenance issues a lot, and dealing with that is actually quite hard, because people invest and it's like, it's no matter how much you detach emotions from it, there's a little bit of emotion, and then you get these bills randomly popping up that you have to pay.
Yeah, that's right.
It's hard. Or if the tenant did something to the house, and luckily me and my clients have never had that, but I hear these stories.
That's right.
Tenants trash the place, and
that's right. Yeah, and we spoke about that through the buying process in terms of getting a nice solid build, relatively newer house. So it's good quality and good standard and well built, and in a good solid affluent area, which is likely to attract good tenants that are going to respect the property and leave it in good condition. So as an owner, as a landlord, I just want it to sort of work and be as quiet as possible. There are always going to be things that pop up. That's I rent. I know that, because I have to go to my estate agent and my landlord. So very conscious and aware of that. But you hope it's as minimal as possible.
Yeah. Going back to the point you made about how you felt quite comfortable, although you didn't see the property, I think a reason for that is there's a lot of stakeholders. So you have the broker,
Yes.
and then you have the bank
Yeah.
that values the property. You have the conveyancer, which is basically a law firm, a legal, takes care of all the legal aspects. And then you have a buyer's agent that deals with everything. And then we have local people that inspect the property for us. And then you have your property manager that then rents out the property. So surely with all these people involved, you would hope that things are going to go right. So there technically shouldn't be any problems, right? It should give someone full confidence that that everything will go well because there's the right people in
right.
every part of it. But yeah, it's surprising. Some people, I think they're like, don't believe it until they see it kind of mindset. They want to go out there and suss it out.
Yeah, and I get it because it's personal style and preference. Because you are, and I did place my trust in everyone, yourself, but also the broker, the conveyancer, the property man. You're placing your trust in them. And they're all respected, reputable, and recommended individuals. But ultimately, you are placing your trust in them in a purchase and an asset that you haven't seen. And some people are less comfortable with that. Some people are more comfortable with that. But to your point, there are so many people in that value chain and that process who are done it time and time again and do it every day. And they live and breathe it, right? It's their 9 to 5. And that certainly gave me confidence that what I'm doing and what I've bought and the decision that I made was the right one.
Yeah. Now let's talk about, we talked about how you had some shares or finance, investments in other asset classes. You decided to come to property. And then we've also covered that you decided that the best strategy for you wasn't to buy your own home to live in. It was to invest and continue renting it until a certain level. Now, the next question, which probably has popped up in your head at the time, was now that you want to invest, where to invest, right? And what property to buy, and how you could have bought one expensive property, you could have bought 3 smaller properties. So all these questions, which I want to get into.
Yeah.
But so generally what we want to do, and I think most people who are investors have the same goal, is you want to get maximum growth, right? And then the question there is, one of the main ones is, where do I invest, right? Which
Absolutely.
location is going to get the most growth, right? And then after that would be then what type of property in that location. But in terms of location, tell us a little bit about how did you end up with the decision that you ended up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the conversation that we had in the process that you took me through in terms of the data and the facts around we talked about capital cities, we talked about regional areas, we talked about types of properties within those areas, be it a house, be it an apartment block, a unit, and the types of yields and cash flow we can get from those. But knowing Sydney and living in Sydney, knowing the property market here, that quickly ruled itself out.
Yeah.
Because of as you touched on earlier, the very, very low yields and returns that you would get from an investment property around here. And there were a couple of other capital cities that sort of ruled themselves out. And I think the conversations that we had, again, were based on the data and the insights that you shared were really powerful. To narrow down, okay, where's affordable based on the budget, the strategy, and what we're looking to achieve. And let's narrow it down into affordability, targeted returns and yield, likely cash flow from the property, and where it is on its growth cycle as well, which is a big thing that we spoke about. And properties going through that sort of growth cycle over
Timing.
the 7 to 10 years generally, I think is what the mortgage market, property market sees. And, picking an area, be it capital city or regional, we went for capital city just outside, where it is on that growth curve, and that life cycle of property, and making sure that we have enough growth left to realize.
Yes.
We were confident in the area, but there was enough growth left to realize that actually the capital appreciation you would get on this property was really attractive.
Yes.
Because we want that, right? We want a property that'll pretty much pay for itself, maybe a little bit negatively geared, but something that will significantly grow each year and will exceed those average growth rates that you talked about. And that was the aim, to complement what was already there from the non-property investments.
That's it. So in terms of location, and you touched on data, like data is a subject that takes, it'll take 2 hours to just talk about it more even. But I would just say that, all the collective data that we look at the end, it comes down to supply and demand. Like that's the core of that. And then on the demand and on the supply, there's hundreds of data points that need to be analyzed to come to that conclusion. But it's actually, look, it's a lot of work that goes into it, but it's fairly straightforward. And I'm surprised that people who invest in locations that I just look at the data and I'm like, what are you, they don't, maybe they don't look at that. And probably they don't. I don't think there's any experts investing in certain locations. But when you look at the data from my lens and the access that we have, it's actually a fairly straightforward decision. There's a bit of, you can go a little bit less yield, you can have different strategies, but it's not that hard to come to the conclusion that this location is superior. It has better fundamentals. Was that the same for you? It was like once it was explained and
I think so. I think ultimately for a property to go up in value, there has to be significant demand in that area, and people want to live there. People want to rent there and purchase there, and that's going to drive property values up, and that's going to drive rent up, right? There's got to be desirability around it, so it has to have a number of factors that are going to draw people to that area and want them to live there, whether that be transport, whether that be general amenities, whether that be closeness to national parks or beaches, or there's got to be a number of factors that want to make people live there. So I think it's the and the demand side is as a whole separate issue. Australia as a country is significantly struggling with that, and I think we'll continue to struggle with that as a country. It cannot build houses fast enough, so that on the demand on the supply side of the equation, that's continuing to be an issue. So that's kind of solves for itself in a sense, right? So it's picking up the demand side and understanding, okay, where is an attractive area, what's going to drive people to come here, alongside where does it sit on that growth, and has that growth and desirability been realized yet?
Yes.
Or is it kind of about to go crazy and is about to boom? So all those sort of factors. But yeah, I mean, supply and demand is a fairly simple concept, right? We use it day to day, but in simple terms, I think there's also an element of confidence. There's a simplicity to it, but again, some people might know that, but might not be confident in the reality of that. It might be a very simple concept and ideology, but again, people might not have confidence. It might be the first time buying any sort of property. That might be the first time looking at this, and they just don't know what they know. So having that confidence and ability to do something is not there.
Yes, and one thing that's interesting, supply demand is a ratio, right? So a lot of people think that the bigger the city, the better the supply-demand ratio, meaning more demand, less supply. I don't know why that is. People just automatically assume if a city is big, it's a better investment, right? But that's a ratio. So technically, if you have a city that's, let's say, 100,000 people, but the supply demand ratio could be worse than a city with 5 million people. Like, it's not related at all to the size, right? But yeah, no, a lot of people just only look at big major cities, and they don't look. I mean, we look at. I mean, if you, for example, Byron Bay, you know, it's a place with, I think, 40,000 people only. Very small place, but it's had some of the best growth over the last 10 years, more than anywhere. And so it's not about how big a city is, right? You know, that's an interesting thing that I always...
Byron has that desirability,
Exactly.
right? People want to live there. There's so many things that draw people to Byron. Beautiful beaches, people, lifestyle. Of course, you know, so it's got that pull and desirability that I was talking about that make people want to live there. It's a smallish, coastal, you know, beachy town, but it has that draw and desirability.
And the people that move there have the money, right? That's very important as well. So when you look at investing, you need... what you need in terms of population growth is the demographic that actually can afford and will buy houses. If an area is growing in population, but those people can't afford to bid higher on auctions, it won't see capital growth. So, and that's what's happening in Byron, is that a lot of people with a lot of wealth are buying there, and the supply is very limited. So So okay, so we've now sort of discussed that at this point, the location, we made a decision on that based on data, and we were confident in that, right? So then the next step is choosing the type of property, right? Was that, I would imagine this would also be fairly simple. Generally, you would want something with a decent block of land. And what was your thinking at that time? And I think most people can relate to this. Land appreciates, building depreciates, but it's a bit more nuanced than that, because, I mean, you could have a very big block, but a rubbish house on it, a really trash house, and that doesn't make sense, right? And we had a lot of these conversations about, do we go with this one? It's 100 meters more, but this one looks nicer. And
that's right. Yeah, it was an interesting one. I remember those conversations, because I think in my mind it was sort of getting that balance between the quality of the house, the size of the house, internal size of the house, quality of build, all that, it's the sort of solid foundational stuff, as well as the size of the block. I think those are two really important things. But the conversations we had, because again, I wasn't sure, is it better to have another 150 square meter total size, but the actual property is a little bit older and less well looked after, and it might actually cost a little bit more to bring up to standard, and the rent on that, although it's a larger space, might be lower. So how does that impact your yield? So I had a somewhat good idea of what good might look like in terms of the size of the property, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, quality, after we've spoken. But there was those nuances around, but there's this one and this one. Which one's better?
Yes.
And how do I know that?
Yes.
Because this is bigger. But does bigger mean better, or does bigger not mean better?
That's it.
And I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And it's again some nuances that we spoke about, that you gave me a nudge in the right direction to say, okay, this is what's important. This is what is not important, and these are the key things to be looking at, because there's a lot of, again, what we talked about earlier, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of information, and there's a lot of noise. And if you don't know the right thing to look for, you can get caught up in all this noise.
Yes.
And all of this information that doesn't really matter. And that's where you were great in helping me with that clarification and say, okay, this is important, focus on this, that's noise.
Yes.
You know, and that was really, really important.
We generally we want to find the sweet spot, right? It's if it was as simple as, and this is the saying that gets thrown around all the time is land appreciates, building depreciates. So if you just want to go off of that, then you would think bigger land is better, right? But imagine this, if you go 4 hours out of a city in the middle of nowhere, you can probably get acres of land.
That's right.
Does that mean it's a good investment? It's more land. So then it's location that matters more than even the block of land, right? So you could have, an apartment with harbor views in Sydney, way more expensive than a house with lots of land. So when you invest, you got to find that sweet spot where it has enough land in the right location. So you can always go a worse location and have bigger land, right? And you can go super nice look in the middle of CBD and buy a studio apartment, right? So it's about from acres of land, 4 hours out of town, studio apartment in the city.
That's right.
There's, and between all of that, there's a place
That's right.
where we find that to be the sweet spot, right? And I think amongst the experts, the sweet spot, there's a little bit different. Some people prefer to go a little bit nicer houses closer. Some people prefer to go a little bit worse but bigger land. But generally, there's like a sweet spot would probably be from here to there, and all the experts are within that.
And I think one of the things as we kind of talking through it, it took me back to this sort of, in my mind, the type of property that I was gonna buy first up was probably gonna be something less nice than I bought, if that makes sense. It was gonna be sort of not very aesthetically nice to look at. It probably needed a bit of work. It was maybe a little bit, it looked like, maybe my grandparents' house. It was a little bit older, and in my mind, that's what I pictured. But in reality, that's not what, we ended up buying. And I think understanding that, okay, what are your goals and what are you setting out to do? Do you want somewhere that's going to have a bit more work to do to bring it up to standard so you can achieve X rental income and X yield? Do you want that or do you not? Do you want something where easy to get the tenants in, really nice to look at, there's appeal, there's desirability, and there's very minimal work and maintenance to do. So again, it's about, I think for me, it was, okay, understanding that, relaying it back to my goals and having that passive income and not wanting to have a lot of engagement and time spent on the property and just letting it sort of work for, sweating the asset, making it work for me rather than getting something that I probably thought in my mind I was going to be buying, but in reality, it turned out to be a little bit different and nicer.
Yes. And, when you think about doing things, actually spending time, with a renovation, or you have to first know the numbers. You have to know what you can expect to take out of that and see if that's worth the effort. A lot of rookie investors, first-time investors that try to do these things, renovation, they actually end up spending a lot of time, energy, and effort, and actually don't make much return on their investment. So it has to be done in a smart way. But for us, when it comes to, we have, that sweet spot that I discussed in terms of the land, in terms of the age of the building. Sometimes it could be a bit older, and your one was on the nicer side of things. But for us, it comes down to the deal, right? Sometimes we might get a deal that needs a little bit of work, but it's a good deal and it makes sense. But so we're not fixed. We're a bit flexible when it comes to those things, and we we look at the numbers. It's all about the numbers and what we can achieve. So we're okay with a little bit of work, a little bit having something a little bit older. Sometimes we go something that's nicer. It just depends on the deal.
That's right. And there was those sort of acceptable parameters.
That's it.
And working between those acceptable parameters, say, okay, a little bit more land, a little bit less land, a little bit older building, a little bit nicer, younger building. And I think those parameters were something that we spoke about based on my level of comfort in what the data suggested and what you advised. So it was that kind of partnership to understand, okay, these are the parameters and I'm comfortable with them. You're comfortable, this is the right buy if we get something within there. So I think that was really important as well.
And there's a lot of other things which I won't touch on here because it can go, but the due diligence checks there's a lot of items there as well that we check. You don't want your property near a power line, for example, right? These all in the background, and some of them we discussed, some of them we didn't discuss. I did all those checks in the background. But now moving on from there, we're getting to the exciting parts of things about offer, how much we offer, what we do, and so once we landed on properties, right, it was like probably 4 or 5 weeks, I think 3, 4, 5 weeks.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah. So but in that every week we had a couple at least that we liked, right, and we wanted to buy. And then this is the big question here, if like the value of our service, I think all the things we do, just in this section, the value of our service is above the price that it's at. Just doing this part of knowing how much to offer and getting the property for the right price, right? It's a very difficult thing actually for most.
Not overpaying. Yeah.
Not overpaying. And the thing is that valuing things is such a kind of a subjective, people have different views about valuation, and it's a fluid concept. It's not if things were valued like you buy a phone, the price is set, right? But property prices, it just depends on your perception, right?
Yeah, and I think that's something that I really realized, especially the area that we ended up buying in. There's so much demand there and properties going so quickly. Yeah. And the realization that I came to is that as soon as someone buys a similar property in that area or an adjoining area, that is the new price.
Yes.
That sellers agents have in their mind. So they've kind of set a new market price. So the previous fixed price of a phone, that ideology doesn't exist. There's like a recalibration of the market. It's a constant evolution of the market, and it is fluid and it constantly changes. So I think, definitely knowing the right price to bid, so you're not overpaying, but equally you're not putting in a bid that's way below what is likely to be considered, because you're potentially wasting time, but also losing out property that you would be happy to pay a little bit more for. So getting that right sweet spot is important.
Yeah, and and with that, and when markets, like for example in the market that we bought for you, it's moving so rapidly, the data has not caught up with yet. So, and people, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have the on the street knowledge of what's happening, and you're looking at the desktop valuations, those valuations could be ancient, and they could be a month old or 2 months old, and 2 months is a long time in some markets.
That's right. And I realized that as we were going through the process. I remember looking online at one of the big banks' property valuation tools, and I was saying, hey Mossy, this property saying this, the valuation site saying this, and we're looking at that, and it is 2-3 months delayed usually, because probably 2-3 months after we offered, actually it's updated, and it's actually the property value is now well above what we paid for it,
Yes.
which is probably the true reflection of the value of the property at the point we bought it.
Yes.
So it's something that, all the data and the insights that for those desktop valuations is out of date. And if you're relying on that, then the information that you're getting and potentially using to put in bids can be wrong.
Exactly.
So I definitely realized that as part of the process. But then it's a nice surprise when you go back in and you see the rise in the property. It's a nice one.
As soon as your property settles, or I don't know when it is exactly, when they update it and it gets the right it goes back to the right amount, and I'm sure you will soon get a valuation, and with the equity we'll talk about the next property. I have no doubt about that, because I know that area is booming so fast that within 3-4 months, we would probably have enough equity for another property. But yeah, about that knowing what to offer, and I wouldn't touch into the how to deal with the agents and negotiation, but that's a whole nother subject as well. But just knowing what something is worth in real estate is very hard for people who are not in the industry, who don't have experience. And what happens is people who try to be tight and they end up looking for a year because they go in, they lowball every time, and it's like, mate, there's huge demand, low supply. It's not a market to lowball. You can, so it's very frequently I see people looking for a year.
And I think that's a really important one. And you've got to look longer term. You've got to have you've got to have a longer term view, because if you're stressing and scrimping on, couple of $1,000 on an offer, but again, if you look at the averages of the annual growth, 10%-ish, 8, 9, 10% in terms of the national averages, it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
So if you're convinced that's the right property, the right area, and the experts that you're using and the data will suggest that, then when it comes down to, as you say, lowballing, you could be looking for a while.
Exactly. But you also don't want to overpay. So you want to be able to. The trick is you want to know exactly what you think it's worth, and you want to buy it under that. So we always accurately estimate what something is worth, and we buy it for less than that. We would never pay equal or more, right? We always want to get it less than what it's worth. And in your case, we had quite a few that we were like, this is the maximum we want to go for this. And other people bought it. We didn't get it.
They did.
Congrats to them.
But that's okay.
Yeah, and that's fine.
But that's okay, because there was an amount that I was comfortable paying. Yes. And we discussed that, and we discussed what you valued it at, and the bid was the bid. Yeah. And we could both walk away from that saying that's okay. Yeah. Because anymore it wouldn't be maybe a good deal if it's a little bit more, but not as good a deal. And we think we can do better.
That's
and
it.
Whoever's bought it, fair play to them, but it doesn't meet those parameters that we spoke about.
And often in the industry, because we have a lot of other buyers agents, and a lot of those properties were bought by other buyers agents. So these are like the top deals, actually.
That's right. Yeah.
And so then eventually on your first one, it was on market, and we made a good offer, and it was accepted, and it was happy days. And that was exciting. And then that's one way when it's on market. And then on your second property, we had a completely different transaction because it was off market, right? So in that one, we look at, this the real estate agent comes up to me with the property and what the seller wants. And then we have to look and value it and see if that's right. And then we buy it. Talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first one was something we jumped on fairly quickly, being on market, and I think sort of within 24 hours, I think it was. That was all sort of signed, sealed, and delivered. So it moved really quickly. That was, that was that. I think a little bit of surprise that it was so simple, right? Because as you said, we'd had a few we'd offered and we just hadn't got it. And then, this one, probably the one we ended up liking the most.
Yes.
It was we actually probably ended up getting the nicest out of the bunch.
We did. It was better than every other one. Yeah.
It was a great, and that all went, very, very smoothly in the end and happened very quick. And the other one was, off market. Very different process, but I think it felt less time pressured, I think, as well, because, that was a deal that was brought to you, and something that you kind of had exclusivity with. So there was that, felt a little bit more time to consider and have a conversation, and especially in these hot markets where things just seem to go, and it's, over within a day. You take it or leave it. We had a little bit more time to talk about it as well. And how does this complement the first one? And does this make sense? And do we want to diversify? All these sort of things that are really important in terms of the second property.
Yes.
How does this make sense for property number 2? So having it off market actually, I think, really helped, because we had a bit more time to discuss it.
Yes.
And I was probably less sure on property 2, because I don't think I was thinking it would happen so fast.
Yes.
But also because it was about, how does that complement the first one? The first one was kind of easier because it was the first one.
Yes.
But the second one there was more to consider in my mind. But being off market and having that, what felt to me at least like more time to consider, and having that sort of security of knowing that, okay, we're across this.
Yes. And even when we had the offer, that's a great spot to be in where we were. And we often are with our clients, is that we have the off-market deal here ready. We just have to sign it. And then we compare that with on-market properties.
That's right.
That are available. Mm-hmm. And we go, do we buy this, or can we get something better here? And then at that time, I always make some phone calls. I make some offers. I price them in a way that it would be better than this deal, and often it wouldn't be accepted. So then we go back and we're like, that's the best one we have, right? So
that's right, and we did that.
Yeah.
We were, and I think that was one of my questions to you is, okay, we have this off market, but what else is on market? What else is there? I want, I kept asking you, give me the full picture.
Yeah.
I want the best of the best. Yeah. Give me the best of the best, and made you work hard for that. But that was, and I think that's what you want as a, as an investor, as someone who's going into this, is you want the full picture. You want to understand what you're buying is the best of the best, and that there are no other options out there that you're not aware of, that you're foregoing, that might have been a better buy. You want that. For me, it was about the peace of mind, the comfort, the confidence that this is the best deal there. No matter whether it's on market, off market, doesn't matter. This is the best deal, and I have confidence this is the best deal. So, having that there, kind of, the confidence that was there. We had a bit more time, but also, you were also still scanning the market as well to see what other deals potentially could work. And it turned out that the deal we had off market was still the best deal, and we went ahead with that.
Yeah, and it was great, and that's in the process now, and it's going to settle soon, and it's going to be great, because I just know that area. So we decided to, both of them are in very similar areas, mm-hmm. and that's because we have the confidence. We believe in that area so much that we did too, and that's a very it's smart. Like, say, Warren Buffett. That's his strategy. Like, when he finds a good stock, he actually goes all in. Mm-hmm. He buys lots of, he just has so much Apple and Coca-Cola stock and things like that. So in investing, as much as diversity is good, but when something is a good area, good deal, there's a lot of value in specializing as well.
And we talked a lot about that, right? Yeah. And I think that was my ingoing assumption, is that, okay, you want to diversify early, but to your point, if you really believe in a stock, a property in the area the property's in, then if you have real belief in that, the process you've gone through, the data, and you know where it is on that growth curve, and it's aligned to your objectives, then in my personal circumstance, it made sense to double down on that, because it just revalidated the first property and the decision that we made. So, and the discussion we had was that made the most sense based on all the other potential avenues, capital cities, regional areas out there. This was still the best opportunity. This was still the best decision, and diversity will come. You know, the next property that we look at, that is most likely where the diversity will come. So it will come in time, but having that belief and confidence that the process we've gone through, the information is right, and doubling down on that was the right way to go for us.
That's it. So we covered most things. So now that you have two, then what's the next step for you? Man,
let it grow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. First one's settled and tenants are in there and cash flow's coming in. Second one is soon to settle. So, you know, once those two are running nice and smoothly, we'll continue to talk over the next few months and see when the valuation of those two properties reach a point where there's enough equity to take out.
Yes.
To do number 3 and number 4. And that's the plan. It's all about passive income and generating that passive income through a number of properties, so that I have flexibility in what I want to do. And the sooner I can get there, the better. And, you know, in my mind with property, it's all about time in market. The quicker we can acquire more properties, the better, because time in market is gold dust. So buying in the right area, buying multiple properties like we have, you know, in the right area, that should get us to those goals quicker. You know, I think in my mind, over the next 6 months, we'll keep tabs on the area, the property we bought, the valuations, and we'll have a conversation when the time is right to say, okay, what's the strategy for number 3 and 4?
Exactly. So what happens, what's really nice when you invest is, you know, sometimes 6 months would be max. You will go, you see you've made a bunch of equity without really doing anything. It's magic, right? Some cash has been created, right? And this,
ding, ding,
and
ding.
yeah, cha-ching, and the bank is ready to give it to you. It's like, great, we'll use it. So you can then take it and buy another one. And, you know, another exciting thing is the interest rates are predicted to be the same or go down. But, you know, next year the rent will go up. So you get more rent. So your cash flow gets better with time. And, you know, the interest rates will stay the same or go down. And the price will go up, and you get equity. And you have more dough to play with. And, you know, you go property 3, and then strategy becomes important. You decide what kind of, what do you need in your portfolio and what you're trying to do. And that becomes really exciting and interesting. And I can't wait to have those conversations, man.
Look forward to it.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you for today.
Of course, no problem.
Yeah.
Pleasure.